So pharmaceuticals are all the prescription medications that we take to keep ourselves healthy, right? But we have so many today that we're getting pharmaceutical pollution. We're seeing those pharmaceuticals in our waters where we're fishing, which is a huge concern. There's been over 600 different pharmaceuticals that have been detected out in the water, out there where we're fishing, where we're recreating, where we're having a good time. This is a big concern. The average American consumes 18 prescriptions per year. These are 30-day prescriptions at least. This is 6.3 billion prescriptions in the US. And that means that we as Americans are spending $460 billion a year in prescription medications. This is half the world consumption. Half of the world's drugs are consumed by Americans. We're not half the world's people, right? But we consume half of the world's drugs. And in Florida, we rank third. So this is a lot of consumption of drugs that are being put out in the environment. The rate of production and release of the pharmaceuticals into the environment, because we produce them, we consume them, and they get out into the environment, is far outpacing the ability of us to assess their safety once they get out in the environment, because we don't really know. And we've been consuming. And if you could see this graphic, it shows this ratcheted, like this slope right here since the 1970s of consumption and production of pharmaceuticals. So we consume drugs, 50% of the drugs we consume, we excrete. So we excrete about 50% of what our doctor gives us. Once we excrete it, right, it can go to the sewer system, right, which great. You guys are 99% on sewer lines, which is fantastic. We're not so good in Miami. We're still 80% on sewer lines. Or we can go to a septic system. If you look at the state of Florida as a whole, 2/3 of our households have sewer lines. 1/3 of our households, believe it or not, are on septic systems, right? Now, if you look at both of them, neither one removes pharmaceuticals. The septic system does not remove the pharmaceutical, and your conventional wastewater treatment, unless you have something special, the conventional wastewater treatment that we do everywhere in the US, everywhere in Florida, everywhere in Monroe County, everywhere in the world, does not remove pharmaceuticals. You need additional steps in that chemistry to remove the pharmaceuticals. So that means that our water, right, it goes through treatment, and then the pharmaceuticals stay, and then whatever that wastewater goes after it has the pharmaceuticals in it. And so once we have our wastewater effluent, it comes out of the wastewater. Where does it go? Well, in Florida, it can have 4 fates. We have ocean outfalls, not here. The Key West one was closed in 2001, but we have in Miami, right? We have 2 giant tubes. We have 6 of them on the coast of Florida between Miami and Palm Beach. Giant tube, right? Put the wastewater out, and just goes out 2 miles out. And that wastewater is carrying pharmaceuticals and other things that they're not very good. We can deep well inject it. So here your wastewater is deep well injected. It goes to the Key Largo station and it gets injected at 2,000 feet. Or it can be shallow well injected. So if any of you are from Marathon, anybody from Marathon? In Marathon, we shallow well inject at 60 to 90 feet and it comes right back up. Wow. Or we can reclaim it. So you may have seen the signs for reclaimed water, right? Don't drink it. The reclaimed water, we use it at many places for, Key Colony Beach does it, for golf courses, for irrigation, right? Because it's great. We want to save water, but that water also has pharmaceuticals. So all of these could be potentially a source of pharmaceuticals. Once we go to treatment, right? Whatever we do with that wastewater, it's carrying the pharmaceuticals. In Miami-Dade, we inject the largest volumes of wastewater, 300 million gallons per day, into the rock at 3,000 feet. Half of it goes out to the outfall in the ocean, half of it gets injected at Black Point. It's a big injection point, and it gets injected, and we inject with the presumption that it stays where injected. We inject it at 2,000 to 3,000 feet, but the reality is that we don't monitor. Wells of 2,000 to 3,000 feet are very expensive to be dug. So we only have wells around the injection point, right, that we monitor whether it comes back up, and it does move. It doesn't stay contained at 2,000 feet. It comes up to half the distance of the surface, and we do this, and then we don't have any monitoring. We don't have a deep well to see, oh, is it here? We don't know where it went. And we know that at 2,000 feet, it's connected to the Straits of Florida, so we know there's connectivity with the ocean at that deep. So there's potential for it to come back up. Nobody knows though. We just keep injecting. We have the biggest permits for deep well injection in the US and Florida, and we inject the most in Miami-Dade County. Lots of huge volumes. And here in Monroe, we do this deep well injection. So your waste up here goes to Key Largo, right by Airport Flat. It gets injected at depth. But in other parts, we have shallow well injection, where that waste is injected and it comes back very quickly. In fact, we know from studies that have injected dyes into the water that it comes back within hours. It travels 75 feet per hour. And you may know that there's a lawsuit in the city of Marathon because of this issue. So it's very concerning. We have high connectivity of the surface water. It's fresh. It wants to come up because, it's more buoyant than the salt water, and it does. So that's very concerning. So once it gets out, then we have maybe a pseudo persistence of this effluent that it's coming out of wastewater, right? Or it might be a leak, it might be a break, like in Key West, we're connected to sewer lines, but those sewer lines are aging, those pipes are in really bad shape, so we have a very leaky wastewater system in Key West, despite the fact that we do deep well injection. But until it gets there, right, it's sort of purging out. So there could be a persistent exposure for these fish, even though, the pharmaceuticals are not that long lived. But if you have constant wastewater, right, the fish are always exposed to the pharmaceuticals. It's also important to note that pharmaceuticals are not considered a pollutant. There's no regulations or their disposal, nor production, so they're not considered a pollutant at all. And they're designed to be very effective at low doses, right? So we only take these tiny, nanograms or very small micrograms of the drug. It's very effective, and it's going to be very effective also on wildlife. And we share physiology with animals. We share physiology with fish. So we're all 70% fish in terms of our physiology. So we have the same systems, the same neuroreceptors in your brain that are targeted by these drugs. So that's also potential for lots of effect. Studies have shown that pharmaceuticals have effects on fish, which is our area of study. They also have effects on other wildlife, but we study fish. All aspects of the fish, the life of fish are affected, their reproduction. Mainly they have altered behaviors that have big consequences for their life, for survival, for reproduction, for the entire population. We work with colleagues in Sweden who are experts in pharmaceuticals, and they've been working on pharmaceuticals and fish for a long time. And they've been studying antidepressants. So when you look at pharmaceuticals and what they do to wildlife, it's the antidepressants that are best studied. So people have been studying the antidepressants for a long time, and everything about everything we look about a fish is altered when it's exposed to an antidepressant. Their behaviors are just like, it's a behavioral drug, right? It's targeted to change their behaviors. So their fish exposed to antidepressants are more active, they feed more, they have a different personality, they're less social, they are more bold, they take more risks. They move more, they explore more, they migrate faster, and they die. They die faster because all of those behaviors are risky behaviors that are not good. So fish have a higher mortality rate when they're exposed to pharmaceuticals. So we wanted to know, are pharmaceuticals a concern for our fishers here in South Florida, given that they're a concern in other places? So we worked on bonefish, and bonefish are just an amazing species. We have 12 different types of bonefish in the world, 3 of them in the Caribbean. They live about 20 years old.
Wow.
They are, that's the oldest. They become mature about 3 to 4 years old. They spend all this time in the near-shore environment, very close to human populations and seagrass beds. They depend on that seagrass. They eat crabs and shrimp and clams, and they have this beautiful little subterminal mouth that points down. So they're digging and foraging, a lot of contact with the sediment. And we know the sediment can harbor pollutants. So they're a really good species. We know they're in close proximity to the shoreline, close proximity to human populations where they could be exposed to any pollutants, including pharmaceuticals. We have a major decline in the fishery. Here is a graphic that shows tournament records. This is the fall tackle tournament showing you the big decline in the population, places where we did not see bonefish. We have a little bit of a comeback of smaller fish that are back, thankfully, but Eddie can tell you more that it's just not the fishery we had years ago. So we wanted to know if pharmaceuticals could be a part of what's negatively affecting bonefish that could be part of that decline. So we also were motivated because most of the pharmaceutical work has been done in rivers just downstream or wastewater treatment plants where people track wastewater production. And here's a picture of the Danube River in Central Europe, showing that if you can see the river is just giant river that cuts through Eastern Europe, and pharmaceuticals, antidepressants were detected everywhere in the river. Different antidepressants, but the entire river is full of antidepressants. They didn't find a single place in the river that did not have antidepressants. So we asked for questions in our research. We wanted to know if pharmaceuticals could be a problem. Here, Nick fished for 93 bonefish out of the entire footprint of the Keys, and we took blood samples from the base of the tail. We took a blood sample with a needle. He's very good at extracting blood if you need blood taken out of you. We took the plasma and we shipped it off to Sweden to our collaborators there. We wanted to know if the problem was everywhere when it comes to pharmaceuticals, so we sampled Biscayne Bay in our urban places where we know there's a lot of people around, all the way to areas west of Key West, to the dry tortugas. And everywhere we fished, quote, we fished, we caught fish, we took a blood sample, we released them, and then we sent those samples to Sweden. Then we wanted to know, well, how big of a problem is it? How serious? They might have pharmaceuticals, but maybe the concentrations are really low. So here we took the concentration that's in the bonefish, in the plasma, in the blood, to what the concentration the target concentration your doctor wants you to have when they give you a prescription. So when your doctor prescribes me a drug, he's like, well, take this, and he's aiming from a certain concentration of that drug in the bloodstream, so it's effective. It's a target concentration, it's a little range. So we know what the concentration is at which the drug is effective. So we said, well, if the fish has 1/3, based on previous research, that concentration, it probably is feeling the effects of the drug. It's very conservative. Either the effects of the drug or the side effects, right? Or both. And then we said, well, how are the drugs getting into bonefish? Then we went on to sample the things they eat. They eat little crabs, right? They eat shrimp. They eat toadfish. They really love toadfish. They eat snails. So we took samples of those. We crushed them, we shipped them to Sweden, and then we waited. So we wanted to show you some of those findings for each of those 4 questions. Here's Nick with a beautiful, nice fish after we took the blood sample, letting it go. So the first question, are pharmaceuticals a problem? Yes. We took 93 fish blood samples, all of them had pharmaceuticals. Wow. We didn't find a single one that did not have them in their bloodstream. The average was 7 pharmaceuticals. So here's like a little graphic that shows you the lowest number was 1, the highest number was 17 pharmaceuticals in a fish. From this little blood sample, we found 58 different drugs in the bloodstream. The most commonly found were blood pressure medications, antidepressants, which people have when they go around the world. Antidepressants always are one of the ones that people find, and prostate medications. And those were all in bonefish. And note that, except for that one fish that had 1 pharmaceutical, all of them have a cocktail of drugs, right? And we know what our doctors tell us, right? Do not mix, right? Do not take this if you're taking that. Don't mix this because the drugs are interacting. And here our bonefish don't have a choice, and they're subject to these cocktails of drug interactions whose effect are, who knows. So is the problem everywhere? Could we find places we thought, well, Miami will have lots of pharmaceuticals, but then we'll come down here, right, and we'll go right here, and those fish will be okay? No. No. So here's a graphic that shows you the average number of pharmaceuticals per fish. We expected a lot of pharmaceuticals up in Biscayne Bay. We got them. An average of 9 pharmaceuticals on a bonefish up there, but you guys, your fish, Upper Keys, Lower Keys, Key West, 6 pharmaceuticals across the board. We go to the dry tortugas and we sample there. Nick went over there on the ferry. We camped. The students camped for 4 days, went fishing. We're like, we're going to go to the dry tortugas just to get some samples because that will be our zeros, right? If we don't find anywhere where zeros, we know dry tortugas. Yeah. We got this. We know what we're doing, scientists, right? We got this. They're going to be zeros. Those fish have 11 pharmaceuticals per bonefish. Wow. How crazy is that? Now, then we started scratching our heads. We went back to studies, and in fact, studies have found pharmaceuticals in remote places, like the entire Baltic Sea. Everywhere they sample in the Baltic Sea, for instance, our colleagues, they find pharmaceuticals. We also know that in places such as remote alpine lakes, right, and remote alpine rivers, where you go at high elevation, you hike up, it's very remote. those fish have pharmaceuticals. Why is that? Tourism, right? And that you can track the abundance of pharmaceuticals by tracking tourist season. Marie's asking if the dry tortugas is because of the way the water moves. I'm gonna let future Dr. Castillo answer this question.
Yeah. That is a great question. The day I got the results, I crunched them and I was like, I need to rerun this 3 times and then make a couple phone calls because this is pretty wild. We saw these results and called up some people that we know that better understand what happens with the wastewater at dry tortugas. So they do have a septic system on site that's mostly only used for like the residents or the park rangers. So there's a septic system. Most of the tourists or visitors, they use like a porta potty that's dry. So they
compost.
Yeah,
it's a compost.
So it's not
Have you been there, right? It's
wet.
a compost, yeah.
But then we still have like the Yankee Freedom. We have a lot of vessels that moor up there. So the most likely scenario, in my opinion, and this is based on some of the pharmaceuticals we find there, is that it's a local source. And we're like, okay, this is one, but what about fish coming from Key West? And what about some of the pharmaceuticals coming through the water from Key West or local places? And if that were the case, we'd expect them to have the fish at Dry Tortugas, a bunch of different types or levels, and more similar to Key West. But if you look at the distance there, Dry Tortugas is very dissimilar to Key West. So that, again, makes me think it's a localized source.
We looked at the similarity of the type of pharmaceutical we found everywhere, and we're like, okay, is it the same type of pharmaceuticals everywhere? Or do we have like distinct, like the Key West fish have a different group of pharmaceuticals, and we go to Miami and there are different pharmaceuticals? And lo and behold, this is a plot that shows you the distance between the little points show you similarity. And the Biscayne Bay fish in Miami are most similar to the dry tortugas. What? I don't know. They have the same assemblage of drugs between Biscayne Bay and the dry tortugas. Remember that 1/3 human concentration comparison we told you to figure out how much of an effect? When we did that, 56% of the fish had at least one drug that exceeded. So we're not only seeing that the fish have the pharmaceuticals, but now half of them have a level of at least one pharmaceutical, many of them more than one, that exceeds that 1/3 the concentration your doctor wants you to have in your bloodstream. And when we look at places, dry tortugas, 93% of the fish exceed. So local exposure in a remote place with just, the Yankee Freedom has 200 people, right? The airplanes bring in another 100 people. We have about 10 sailboats there. I've sailed there before.
I was there in December and it was holiday season.
Holiday season.
Busy.
You have 400 people.
Yeah.
If half of them pee in the water, right?
Right.
We got it. Check mark. That's it. So you can have a very localized spot, very small number of people, or you can live in a place like Miami, 2.8 million people. Terrible, terrible wastewater treatment. So I wanted to show you this one last slide that I don't want to get you down, but this is fish 43. Fish 43 was fished in the Lakes Passage between Key West and the Marquesas. It had 16 drugs. It had 8 antidepressants at 10 to 300 times the human concentration. It had a schizophrenia drug at 296 times what prescribed to a person. It had an antidepressant. It had Zoloft at 40 times what's prescribed to a person. It had Paxil at 12 times what's prescribed to a person. It had 3 heart medications, 10 times what's prescribed beta blockers to a human.
Oh, wow.
It had a Parkinson's disease medication. It had an antihistamine, an antifungal drug, a stomach drug, and it had codeine. This is one of the most polluted fish, but just a reality check that it can get really serious. And this guy was caught in this beautiful flat, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful day.
Really nice day. What's interesting too, this fish, those 5 fish that we sampled, were all in the same flat, presumably from like the same school that they branch off. This fish had a lot more than all the other fish. So it could be that this fish came from a particular hotspot and joined this school. There's recent research into whether or not fish become drug addicts, and trout, given the ability to choose water with methamphetamines or clean water, choose the methamphetamine water. So a little bit more of an anecdotal example, but let's say they develop a dependency on these drugs, it can definitely change their
It's not a
movement.
remote possibility that they're dependent.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a study showing that they choose the water with the drugs.
Wow.
2 studies now, right?
Yeah, it's more than one.
So we also found it in their food. So the crabs, the shrimp, They have
Everything.
it, and they have more pharmaceuticals. 11 pharmaceuticals on these little shrimp.
Oh my god.
11 pharmaceuticals on average on shrimp. You guys, it's crazy. So the good news, our last slide
Here's the
here,
good news, guys.
is that we can all fix it, right? This can all be fixed. We just need those additional steps in wastewater treatment. Done in Sweden, Switzerland, ozonation works really well, so that clean water can be reused, and we kind of have to apply what we call, that sustainability thinking about sustainability that we've been talking about, we hear more about, to wastewater. Our wastewater is too damaging and too valuable at the same time. We need to reuse that water, right? We need to clean it up. We need to reuse that water. The volumes that we inject in Biscayne Bay can be used for Everglades restoration.
And regardless of the source, the solution is the same. It's wastewater treatment. It's the most effective barrier.